Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here. I'm talking about for like what you call like imagination, and also it can also mean as to where what does it usually mean when we assume something. And let's just say that if we're going to be reading a story about for how somebody meets, and let's just say that if it's going to be anything in particular, and have right here for talk about for the year 2023 right here. I say you think about the year 2023 and where I meet most of the time. 2022, 2022. But anyway, but you talk about the future right here. But you have right here are these two images right here, and like any story that you're going to be reading about, that you might come up to the idea about the fact about with most of the time that whenever you do read a story or read any sorts of topics, that what sorts of signs, and also that what you automatically assume about something. And let's just say that what does it usually mean when we assume something? It's just another way of how you want to guess, and I guess it's another way of people may say too that that's just another way of how people guess. And it's basically another way of stating to where that you are pretty much are guessing what the story is. And like it's kind of like it's kind of like a clue. And if you want to go ahead, I'll go ahead and write down on here. It's like it's a clue. Assuming something is just like a clue. It's just like a clue. And so when we assume something, that usually that means it's a statement to where it kind of gives us a clue about an idea about what the topic is. And of course, like anybody say, that if you're going to be discussing something or anything else that you're going to be talking about, and at the time you want to know too that whenever you guess something, that if that's another way of how teachers look at it, as to where well, if that's really another way of how you show that you try working on something, or if anything, that's just another way of how people are thinking, as to where that's not really called thinking. That's just kind of like shouting out, or everybody else might even say too that if it's really the opposite of cheating or anything like that. But still, but at the time that you want to know too is to where what sorts of signs and weaknesses do we usually see whenever people say is as to where if you're trying to understand something, and maybe if you just try to assume something a lot of times. And a lot of times it's like whenever you assume, you think ahead of time about stuff, right? You think ahead of time. And so like you say that when it's like you really need to love what you do. And so I include this right here, just like what you call other sources saying. And like anybody probably say too that anybody that you do meet at some point, and you tell them a story about something, but still that your fair share, and right here, but still that but I also want to talk about signs of weakness, and also strength too. And so whenever you're going to be talking to somebody in person, it sure seems that way, that most of the time the conversations start by that try to familiarize yourself with any source of topic or agendas or anything else that comes to your mind. So the first thing that you're going to maybe say is that the first thing that's really going to come to my mind is that any favorite book titles or events or anything like that stuff that you can remember, stuff that you can follow up with, and other things that come to your mind. But really that in case if anybody were to ask as to where how the conversation started, is as to where that the first thing that's really going to come to your mind when we think about that is that number one, though, that when we think about that is that really that a lot of things are things that you have a lot of challenges, And what I mean by challenges, though, that the challenge is based on a lot of the complicated, complicated agendas. So I can go ahead and just use that. I'm like, for agenda, for the complicated agendas. So it's like, that when we're talking about that, for agendas or anything, such as tests and all that, but still a lot of things for what we have a lot of challenges with us. So I say, so in case of anybody that might even say too that what does that usually mean when someone says in quote, you got to love them for that. You got to love them for it. And then, so a lot of times it sure seems that way that whenever it comes to talking about stuff, and you're probably thinking too, that is to where that really, what does that usually mean? And I can go and maybe put like a dash or parentheses or like, anything like that. Quotation marks. So I'm like, so really that, what does that usually mean whenever somebody says that? And if they're going to include a parenthesis marks, and also if they're going to include like any quick memos or anything like that, what does that usually mean when somebody does it? And half the time it seems like, most of the time it sure seems that way, that there's 2 or 3 different conversations going on within a specific time. And, if you go back and edit or maybe change something or try to rewrite a paragraph or anything like that, but still that, but I know that, whenever we think about the topics though right here is to where that whenever you do start writing something, and it sure seems that way that, does it usually start to where that you got maybe 2 or 3 other people reading what you're typing or something like that, and then you go back and look at something and anything that needs to be verified, reviewed, or modified or anything like that. But really though that, whenever it comes to understanding about that whenever somebody says that you gotta like you gotta love it for it or something, so a lot of times it sure seems that way that people would say that is to where that for showing you caring, for support, but then also about the research, the stuff, the stuff that for what works. So if you want to go and put on here for it really works, exclamation points. So that if you want to include like maybe a quotation, but still that I know this is like you're kind of like jotara, talking right here, but still I want to mention that about in case if anybody were to think about that, is to word it that whenever you start writing and talking about something, and then it's like you start talking to somebody about something, and a lot of things that kind of come to your mind whenever you first start talking about something. And a lot of times it's like forming a draft, and then maybe a layout or something like that you start talking about stuff, but a lot of times it sure seems that way that that whenever we think about that though, that talking about the things that we like, and then of course a lot of rough challenges, but also any sorts of signs of weakness, and also talking about that about the things for what people say, is to whenever you get in these conversations about really, do you what does it usually mean whenever somebody says something like you really gotta love them for it? But I guess like anybody say too that a lot of times that happens to where whenever you have your discussions and your arguments about stuff, trying to agree on certain things. And so a lot of times everybody else might even say that that's usually what happens whenever you have your discussions and you have your arguments about stuff, and you can't agree on everything, and you're trying to talk somebody into, I'm like, oh yeah, anything like that, but still. But usually though, what exactly do you necessarily see when we talk to somebody in person? What exactly do we see necessarily? Do we necessarily think about is this toward there's going to be requirements and suggestions and all that, but really though, that whenever you start talking about something, it sure seems that way. It all kind of comes together about anything that you talked about on paper or anything that you talked about, maybe even in the class, maybe in the conference meeting or anywhere like that. And then you're gradually understanding a lot bit more that you talked about. So it's like, whenever you have conversations with somebody, then a lot of times it's like that there's a lot of things that somebody just doesn't understand right away. But, almost all the time, whenever you have these in-person conversations, like everybody else will probably say too, when we can, interesting, but can we, can we talk over the phone? So let's just say that if you were to start that, a lot of times it's like they're going to include quotation marks and then add in maybe a few number symbols or anything like that. But it's like you want to know too that any number symbols or anything like that. But still, that I just really think that that whenever it comes to understanding about that. That whenever it comes to understanding what people are trying to say and all that, and a lot of times it's like, I really that if we can go ahead and talk over the phone about anything, any results that you came up with, or but so a lot of times that I experience that about people say is that they would much rather talk over the phone about about the job and also anything else that you want to discuss during the meeting, rather than be just trading messages over the email and of course over the chat. But still that like everybody else would probably say too, most of the time it's the email that's required for a return. Email address most of the time. And I'm like, So it's like, in case of anybody that may even say too that, the email address, right? How come, at or something like that, but still, the email address, and so an email address is just another way, like, of how you want to get, somebody to show a return or to correspond, or send a text message, anything like that. But at the time, you want to know too that most of the time, that whenever you talk to somebody over the phone, it sure seems like that the conversations last a little bit longer over the phone than compared to maybe somebody reading a paper that you were working on or something like that, any sorts of a documentation that you typed or anything like that. But anyway, that's just stuff that I want to talk about also, and then knowing that the things that you might see wrong and want to know too about when to speak up about something, but still. But the way I think about it too, though, that whenever it comes to understanding about is to where that, the imaginable beyond tomorrow, for your fair share. But anyway, talking about it's like in reasonable ways of how you want to show, your concern and courtesy and respect and kindness, that sorts of stuff. Anyway, nice for watching everyone, and have a great day.